This is In Step with Compliance, a podcast by the Modern Practice Solutions team for dental professionals.
Welcome to In Step with Compliance. My name is Olivia Wann, and this episode is sponsored by Modern Practice Solutions. In today's discussion, we're discussing OSHA and the Hepatitis B vaccine. This is often a question that comes up when we're working on site with our dental clients, as well as support questions. So we're going to take the opportunity to interview Caitlin Denison, as well as our trainers, to learn more about the topic. So Caitlin, just get us started.
Yeah, so the hepatitis B vaccination is something that we always bring up in our trainings because it's such a key part of the bloodborne pathogen standard and of protecting employees from bloodborne pathogens. Most dental professionals are aware of the risk of contracting hepatitis B that is inherent to working in the dental field. We're exposed to blood and other potentially infectious material pretty frequently throughout the day. We do, however, find that many employers and employees have questions about how to implement their hepatitis B vaccination program and what your rights are as an employee and what your responsibilities are as an employer. So today we're going to answer some of those questions.
So as an employer, Caitlin, are they required to pay the cost of the vaccine? And what about if their individual health insurance covers vaccines?
Yeah, so it is the employer's responsibility to provide the vaccination to all employees who have occupational exposure to bloodborne pathogens, which would just mean occupational exposure to blood or other potentially infectious material, free of charge. You cannot bill that employee's insurance. The practice has to entirely cover the cost of that vaccination.
So Caitlin, some of our listeners may not be aware that you were a former OSHA inspector. When you were auditing a dental office, specifically, what kind of documentation were you looking for?
As an inspector, we need to see documentation that employees were offered this vaccination. If your employee did not want to accept the vaccination, that is just fine. However, it's very important that you document that they declined the offer of vaccination. So for example, if you have an employee who simply does not wish to get vaccinated for personal or religious reasons, that is just fine. But as the inspector, I am certainly going to look for that signed declination statement indicating that the employee was offered the vaccine, but simply didn't want it. It looks very suspicious to an inspector if you say, oh yeah, we offered it, but they just didn't want it. And you have nothing to back that up, right? As the inspector, I'm going to say, what's going on with this employer? Why this seems a little fishy, right? So it's really important that you have thorough documentation that this was offered and either was accepted or was not accepted.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Caitlin, that without documentation, it's the employer's word against the employee's word. And what I have seen in cases that I've handled in the past, that the Department of Labor sided with the employee. So you can't just verbally offer it. It has to be in writing, as you stated, and have that documentation available should that dental office be audited. And right now we're working with a group and helping them put together quick sheets, so to speak, to onboard employees. And that means, just go ahead and download the templates or put them on your desktop for the employee medical record that has the hepatitis B vaccination consent or declination. So when you hire new people, you're capturing all that correct documentation in advance. And once it's completed, it will be scanned and stored to a password protected file because it is confidential, or if it's a paper record, under lock and key. So Brenda, you've been working in dentistry for a long time, having served as a safety manager and now consulting with our clients about OSHA and HIPAA. When it comes to working with the employees and you're onboarding them, because I realize you've worked in managerial positions, what do you do when an employee does not want to be vaccinated?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have, as part of our initial hire, we have all of these tasks involved in our check to-do list for an initial hire. And so that is one of the things that's on the initial hire checklist. And if an employee declines or decides to decline the doctor's offer to have the vaccine, they're going to go ahead and sign a declination form that will be then added to their employee medical record. So that shows that the doctor offered the vaccine and that the employee chose not to have it at that time.
So it's all about the documentation, isn't that right, Brenda?
It sure is.
So Terri, you've worked with our compliance clients for many, many years. What are your thoughts on if the employee declined it, as Brenda spoke to, and then they later changed their mind that now they want it?
Great question, Olivia. So the employee would contact the safety coordinator, and the safety coordinator would make arrangements with the post-exposure clinic that is already predetermined for the practice. And the employee would sign a consent form and then go to the predetermined post-exposure clinic and receive the vaccination.
So Terri, when you say post-exposure clinic, just for our listeners, would that be the same thing as occupational medical clinic? Would they handle those services?
So yes, the employee has the right to change their decision on the hepatitis B vaccination. So if they declined it in the past, they can inform the safety coordinator that they've changed their mind and now they would like the hepatitis B vaccination. At that point, the safety coordinator would have the employee sign a consent form and then set up or make arrangements to have the vaccine provided for the employee. And normally that is done at the occupational medical center that is predetermined for the practice, because the employer will pay for the vaccination. Now, the employee can choose to go to their primary care doctor to get the vaccination, but the employer still has to pay for the vaccination.
Correct. So the thing is that the employer's responsibility is to compensate for that expense. So you make a good point that regardless, it would be reimbursed by the employer or paid directly. And when we set up clients' policies for safety management, when Terri speaks to a predetermined clinic, we have to have arrangements made ahead of time, because if there was a sharps injury, a needle stick injury, risk of the bloodborne pathogens, splash, splatter, so on, we don't want to be scrambling at the last minute trying to locate a facility that can handle these types of incidents. So when we're building policies out, we basically Google occupational medicine in the area that they're practicing and then set up the account ahead of time. And when we say set up the account, the clinic would capture the workers' comp information so that when the employee visits the clinic, they're not being asked for their personal health insurance, which would be kicked out anyway because it's a work-related injury. Mm-hmm. So whether it's vaccines for work or post-exposure management, we endeavor to create that relationship in advance. So thank you, Terri, for highlighting that. So Caitlin, what about the booster shots? We get quite a bit of support questions. Do they need a booster shot? So for example, I was vaccinated probably around 1986, before it was even a requirement of OSHA. If I were to return to serving as a dental assistant, do I need a booster shot?
That's a good question, and we're lucky that the bloodborne pathogen standard answers this very clearly. OSHA standards don't always do that, but this one does. So the bloodborne pathogen standard states that a routine booster dose of the Hep B vaccine must be made available at no cost to the employee if it is recommended by the U.S. Public Health Service. So currently, the CDC does not recommend a booster for most people. So in most cases, immunity from the Hep B vaccine will last a lifetime. However, that is not always the case. It is recommended that after you get vaccinated, you have a titer pull to see if you have the antibodies against hepatitis B. If you don't, you might need to be revaccinated. But as a general rule, if somebody has been vaccinated and has developed immunity, they do not need a booster shot unless the guidance from our public health service changes.
Correct. So, and that's part of that post-exposure management process. You know, they would evaluate the level of immunity and make recommendations at that point too, whether there should be a booster injection or not. And as you stated, Caitlin, from what CDC tells us, it's supposed to be lifetime immunity, providing you completed the series. Now, some are non-responders, and that's a different case, but that would be a different dynamics. But Caitlin, while you're on the topic, can you require employees to be screened? Like, what if a dentist is concerned that there's risk of liability? Can a dentist require the employees to be screened prior to offering the vaccine?
No, and this is another area where the standard is pretty explicit. The standard states that the employer shall not make participation in a pre-screening program a prerequisite for receiving the hepatitis B vaccination. So essentially, this is to prevent employers from adding that extra step to require employees to be screened for immunity before offering that vaccination. So regardless, as the employer, it's your job to offer the vaccination to employees. They can decline, they can take that as they will, but regardless, you have to offer it to them, and you can't pose that extra hurdle of pre-screening prior to offering the vaccine.
So this is a lot of information on just the hepatitis B vaccine, just one small component of the bloodborne pathogen standard. And even though it's a small topic, it generates lots of questions. I really appreciate how the Modern Practice team trainers have come together in this episode to give you insight of the types of questions that we receive with our support calls and during training sessions. Thank you again for tuning in to In Step with Compliance by Modern Practice Solutions, and we look forward to working with you in additional episodes.